So, welcome to part two of the series, the 7-part series, where I analyze 7 pitches from Launch Accelerator's recent cohort 30. These pitches were all uploaded on YouTube, so I decided to take a look at all of them and give my opinion on how the pitch was, how the slide deck was, how the story was told, what I liked, what I thought could have been a little better, and then ending with, what do I rate the pitch deck and would I invest or not? So, if this is your first time listening to the series, I recommend starting with part 1. I go over a little more of the fundamentals of a good pitch deck, but as a reminder, I'll quickly go through a typical slide deck format you want to follow if you're a founder pitching to investors. You want to have the customer's problem, your solution to that problem, what's the market size and growth, what's the traction so far of your business, revenue growth or customer retention, what's the business model, how are you going to make money, why now? Are there any technological innovations or market advancements that make you think this is the best time to start this company? What's the current competition? Why are you better than them? What's your team? Why is your team uniquely built to build this solution to this problem? What's the ROI for the investor? What's the long-term vision for your company? And then how much money do you need from investors and why? What do you plan to do with that money? So again, those slides can be combined, extended, however you see fit in whatever order you think is best. But those are like the 10 things you need to make sure you check off. Again, before I go into this next company, some general strategies to employ. If you already listened to part 1, you can skip this, but you want to front load the pitch deck with your strongest features. So if your team is excellent, worked at OpenAI, DeepMind, and now you're building a new AI video generation tool, start with that. That's an excellent way to start. Gives the investors the mindset that you're excellent and can build this. If it's, the traction, if you're growing 100% a month, start with that. Second, immediately address any concerns or questions early in the pitch to clear the investor's minds. If the investor has a question early on in your pitch or just anywhere throughout your pitch, they're going to be thinking about that question and not listening to you as intently. So practice with friends before. Make sure there are no questions an investor could possibly have in your pitch and they can just listen to you with their full attention. Number 3, the more numbers and the fewer words per slide, the better. Numbers tell a better story than words. Numbers are data, they're truth. Investors like that. Number 4, tell a story. Don't just regurgitate information. Tell a story, make it fun, make it interesting, make the investor want to listen, make it more attentive. And then lastly, exude confidence and optimism. Don't just have the investor listen, make the investor want to join this ride with you. Be excited about the journey just as much as you are. So those are general strategies to employ, general rules to hit in your pitch deck, boxes to check. But anyway, today we're going to talk about the Launch Accelerator Portfolio Company PodcastAI. So we'll take a look at, what they did well in their pitch, what they could have done better, my overall assessment of their deck, and why I would or would not invest in the company. So let's dive in.
I'm Bird, CEO and co-founder of PodcastAI. We automate your podcast.
So right off the bat, every company, every startup needs that few word, one sentence like catchphrase, the elevator pitch essentially. What do you guys do? Oh, we're PodcastAI. We automate your podcast. It's perfect. I mean, it's that simple. That's what they do. Obviously, it's a lot more complex than that, as we're about to find out, but that's just a great, catchy, mind frame setting statement to go through. So always have that one sentence, few word, just statement. Let's keep going.
So podcasting is huge. There's just under 500 million listeners right now, and the industry is growing 30% year over year, and it's going to reach 100 billion by 2029.
So obviously, as you can see, huge industry that's growing rapidly. 465 million people listen to podcasts. That number is growing 30% year over year. That's a huge growth rate on a huge number. Podcast expected to generate 100 billion in revenue by 2029. Just massive numbers. And so I like that Edward just, bam, here are the numbers. Like now you can see it. I don't need to say much. These numbers are insane. This market is insane. I love how Edward starts with the market side. Most people start with the problem, but I like how Edward starts with the market to just say like, bang, by the way, before I go into my product, just know that there is some serious potential in this market. There is a massive wave right now, and I plan to ride it, and I plan to be at the forefront of, riding that wave, for lack of a better word. So always a smart move. Again, as I said, start with your best features. There's a lot of good features of Podcast AI, but this market is obviously very, very attractive. So I like that he started with this. That was a good idea. Let's keep going.
So meet Nick. Nick, you might know, produces All In and This Week in Startups and now Liquidity. And he has hours of manual work to do every single week, every day, putting out these episodes, titles, descriptions, chapters, ad reads. And he has things that he before wanted to be able to do, but just didn't have time to do, like manage an entire show website.
So a good description of the problem, telling an example of a real podcast producer, a real customer of Podcast AI. We talked about this with Malengo, about how telling a story with a real customer is a really good way to tell that problem because it's real, it's proven. An investor can know that this problem is an actual problem because you have customers actually using it. So always good to use a real customer. The problem sounds, difficult. Sounds like a lot of manual work, as he said, and that's someone you have to pay for that manual work. And that work seems tedious and not really too intellectually challenging. Titles and descriptions, table of contents, ad reads. That's not, anyone can kind of do that. I mean, other people can do it better than other people, but it's not too difficult. So the slide itself, it's fine. Simple images with the only words being shown as the challenges. There's no other fluff. It definitely emphasizes the problems and make it clear. And I think this manual work is a real and annoying problem for podcasters and podcast producers. I know this from personal experience. It's hours of tedious work, and the text on the sides indicate that. It says hours of manual work for titles and descriptions, table of contents, ad reads. And it says how there's no time to even do a show website. What I would have liked to see, so good slide, but it could have been a lot better. And so what I would have liked to see is to emphasize this problem with some sort of metrics. He gave a blanket statement. Podcast producers spend hours on this stuff, but how many hours of manual work does it take for a podcast producer to do titles and descriptions and chapters and ad reads? If it's 4 hours and the podcast does 3 episodes a week, that's 12 hours that it takes a podcast producer to do all this work. So if you're paying that person $25 an hour, for example, that's $300 a week or $1,200 a month that podcaster is paying to that podcast producer. Now investors can see that and say, a podcaster probably doesn't want to pay a producer $1,200 a month for this simple and tedious work. They'd probably love an automated solution. So anytime you can use numbers to emphasize a statement, find numbers. It'll only help your pitch. I'd also love to find some numbers for how having a podcast show website increases the discoverability or retention of a podcast, because that's not really something that's been explored too often, having a podcast website. That's interesting though. So the numbers might be hard to find. You probably have to talk to some podcasters who have websites, but if you could say in your pitch something like, one top podcaster with 1 million listeners got 5% of his audience from discovering his show website. And those 50,000 listeners are worth $10,000 a year for this podcaster. Whatever those numbers are, they can help emphasize another point that, okay, not only are you paying $1,200 a month for a producer to do all this manual work that we just went over, but you're also missing out on $800 a month in revenue from your show website and those new listeners. So these two problems combine for an opportunity cost of about $2,000 a month for that podcast. So now as an investor, I can see this is an expensive problem, which means there's a high bar a podcaster would pay for this service. I mean, hypothetically, podcasters should pay anything less than $2,000 if their opportunity cost is $2,000 a month for their lost potential revenue and what they have to pay a podcast producer. So the slide is fine. I mean, it tells me the problem from a customer's real experience, which is good. But I think if they could have gotten some numbers around, instead of hours of manual work, what does that cost a podcaster? Because, you're selling to podcast producers to make their jobs easy. So anytime you can put in numbers, put in those numbers so people can see the real ROI for the customer and why they would pay for your product. But anyway, let's keep going.
With Podcast AI, Nick just drops in his latest episode and he automatically generates everything. Those descriptions, those chapters that would previously take half an hour, it's all done in 30 seconds. In fact, we even generate a list of the top 10 viral moments for the episode and let you generate the social posts that go along with it for every platform. We also automatically generate an entire website for you. So your podcast gets turned into a website. This is thisweekinstartups.com, powered by PodcastAI right now. And this entire website is automatically created as a byproduct of using PodcastAI. So you see all these latest episodes laid out. You can search. Every single episode has its own super SEO optimized page with the speakers identified, all the socials. We even automatically identify the partners for the show. And on top of letting the audience have the transcript, we actually let the audience chat with AI versions of the hosts. So you can actually chat with the AI besties.
So to recap here, we're talking about the solution side to that customer's problem. I thought it was great. Again, I always love a brief demo of the product to see how it solves that customer problem. There's several features of Podcast AI, clearly, and each feature is brief but clear and effective. So what I like about this is that since there are so many features, I think he laid out 5 or 6 different features. He's probably very proud of them. So he could want to talk about each feature for a long time, which would bore investors. If you have 5 features, you can talk about each feature for 20 seconds. I mean, that's almost a minute and a half just talking about your features. That can take a while on the pitch. So quickly get to the point about what your feature is, what it's good for, why it's interesting. Try to keep that within 5 or 10 seconds and move on. Interested investors will understand what you're saying and they'll want to engage further after the pitch to talk more about your features and to dive into the product. So Edward does a good job here of that. Edward's the CEO talking. So I like how he's just quick and gets to the point with all his features. I also like his quote where he says, creating chapters and descriptions that could take 30 minutes get auto-generated in 30 seconds. Again, I love when someone can use numbers to just clearly state the value prop. And that's perfect. 30 minutes to 30 seconds. Huge time saver, huge money saver. That's a great solution to this problem then. That's a great feature. And so personally, I love all these features. As someone who runs a podcast themselves, all of this stuff is tedious and annoying, and I don't particularly enjoy doing it. I enjoy writing my blog posts and talking into the mic and not all the tedious editing. All of the solutions here look fantastic and clearly provide value. My favorite feature and what got me most excited was the feature to talk to the podcast host and guests. So one of the biggest problems I face and anyone faces when listening to podcasts is just retaining all the information. If I love This Week in Startups and I listen to a recent episode, but want to distill some key information into notes for me to have, I can just ask a question on that show's website and get a perfect answer. In my Substack, I took a screenshot of an example I gave where I said, This Week in Startups had an early employee from Uber. And so I could ask, what were this person's 3 top lessons from Uber? And then the Jason Calacanis, host of This Week in Startups, the Jason Calacanis bot just tells me what those 3 biggest lessons were. Now I have that information. So that's great for listeners, but it's also helpful for hosts who want to tweet about an episode. Jason can say, I had this person from Uber on an episode. Here were his 3 top lessons from Uber. And by just asking himself as an AI bot, which is pretty weird and interesting, he can get that tweet basically made for him. So, all the other features were obviously more relevant, like the chapters being automatically generated, the titles, the descriptions, all of that was more relevant. But this feature, it's a nice to have probably, but because it doesn't really save real dollars for podcast hosts. But I thought this was just such a cool feature. And I would love to have that as a host and as a consumer. Again, it helped me as a host with tweets, but it also helped a consumer engage with the podcast further and learn more. I mean, I'd be curious to talk to Edward, the CEO here, more after the pitch about whether they're thinking about spinning this out as a consumer product for super fans of shows to pay for. Podcast AI can pay for this premium subscription to the podcast, or, that money goes to the podcast. Maybe some of it goes to Podcast AI, whatever, to access this chat room with a AI generated host. Because that's basically like you're talking to the host, which is very valuable. I mean, that host is made from content that the host has said. So it's a very accurate representation of that person. So I think that's something actually worth some money. I mean, there are companies that charge, or speaker fees that charge thousands of dollars for people to come talk for 30 minutes. So I think if you charge $2.99 for someone to talk to a virtual host that's basically the same person, I think people would pay for that. So I'd be really curious to have that conversation with Edward about spinning this out as a consumer product or a premium feature rather than just one that's free for people to use. So really cool solution side, a lot of awesome features. I like how crisp he was with describing the features. I'm excited about this pitch, but let's keep going.
In terms of traction, so we've been growing pretty fast. We got our first paying customers in September, and we grew 90% in January. And in fact, as of last Friday, we crossed 100K in ARR run rate.
So good slide. I mean, a chart always looks good with exponential growth, so that's always great to see. I also like how he put the percentage growth numbers below the chart to show that this thing is growing really fast. I mean, 56% growth in November, 100% growth in December, 90% growth in January. I mean, that's some serious growth. So I like that he put that below the chart, below the graph to say like, yeah, these, it looks exponential, but like, here's just how exponential it actually is by some numbers. So obviously this growth is ridiculous. I mean, going from $0 at the start of September to $100,000 in ARR halfway through February is just insane. That's definitely showing signs of product market fit. I also like how this slide came right after the solution slide because this is an investment ceiling slide. I already loved all the features. I already thought they solved the problem well. I already know this market is huge and growing. So I was already very interested based on that. But once I saw this slide that like, yes, everything you said, people are paying for it. We're getting a lot of money from it already. Just 5 months later, I was like, I'm not going to spoil my decision here, but I was thinking to myself, like, wow, this company is very, very interesting. And I would have to think very hard about investing in it because, again, just ridiculous growth that confirms customers love the features they offer and is truly having a positive ROI. But this is only slide 4, so we have a lot left. So let's keep going.
So our business model is SaaS subscriptions. So we have professional, small business, and business plans, and we're targeting existing podcasters, people that are starting a business, and right after opening their HubSpot account, they need to start a podcast for lead gen and running their marketing. Small businesses, that's producers and also agencies producing podcasts.
So good slide. I mean, again, a simple and clear graphic that just shows the price tiers and which companies fit into those price tiers. I actually like that he has the little descriptions, individual podcasters under professional, producers and SMB under small business. Not every company does that. And I think that's because not every company has these boxes fully understood yet. A lot of SaaS subscription models have these pricing tiers, like typically a small, medium, and large tier, but they don't really define too well who fits into what. So I like that Edward here clearly states which podcasting entity would fit into each category to show that there are customers for each entity. And this isn't just, coming out of their ass here with their business model and what they plan to charge and who they're targeting in those markets. So I like that. So again, this reminds me though, again, I'm seeing how much people would charge for the product. I wish I knew how much people currently spend on their problems. Again, like I calculated for the problem side, an individual podcaster with a producer, likely spends roughly $2,000 a month in actual costs to pay the producer to edit the podcast and also missed revenue by not having that show website, potentially. These are all just estimates, but regardless, I'm sure they'd happily spend $600 a month then. So if I knew that cost that podcasts were facing, when I'd see this business model slide, I could see that ROI for the podcaster. And I could say, oh my gosh, spending $2,000 a month to produce these podcasts, Podcast AI makes that so much easier for them for just $600 a month. That's a no-brainer for podcast producers and podcast hosts. So that's why quantifying problems is so helpful, because then when you talk about your customers and your pricing, it's clear that they would pay that amount since that's a positive ROI. And based on my calculations and Podcast AI's pricing, a very positive ROI. So it's a no-brainer for customers. And so I already touched on this, but I think, they could attract each tier based on the products they offer. I think it's a very real solution that they're giving. I also like how these are very large contract values. And, since there are likely hundreds of thousands of active podcasters out there right now, there's a large TAM out there for Podcast AI to take advantage of and to pay those large contract values. I mean, there's so many companies that are starting their own podcasts. I don't know why, especially venture capital firms. Everyone's starting their own podcast. And those firms print money. So, $24,000 a year for them to have all this stuff automated for them so they can just stick to, investing and what's most important to the firm, they'd pay that in a heartbeat. So there are plenty of companies out there, even in the very expensive business tier, to pay for them. So that makes me feel really good about that. No, it's very reasonable to attain those whale customers. The only question I'd have after seeing this slide, and I would ask afterwards, this isn't something someone typically says in a deck, but I'm curious like what their breakdown of their customer base currently is. I'm not suspecting they have anyone in this business tier right now. They're probably mostly in the professional or small business tier, but I'd be curious to see what that breakdown is. I'd be curious to see, when they'd start really going after the business tier, when they think they can get their first customer, because that's really interesting. It's just good to know these things to see where they're targeting and where they're having the most success, because then you kind of know where to focus the most of your attention to when selling the product and marketing the product. So good slide, simple. Let's keep going.
Our go-to-market is founder-led sales via LinkedIn, podcasts and trade shows, and a referral program to turn our customers into our marketers in a way.
So again, another simple slide. These are all very simple slides, which I like. Again, I said few words and more numbers. That's better. So I like how these are just very simple slides. These are good accelerator level strategies. Accelerator is in the stage they're currently at as a company, PodcastAI. So I like how there's no reliance on paid ads. That's always a good sign. Seems like there's either organic growth or founder-led sales, which is fine because that's kind of free in a way. And I suspect the referral program to be pretty fruitful. I mean, podcasters listen to other podcasts, so it should be pretty easy to get the word out to their target audience for free by just having to pay an affiliate marketing rate, which is, always a good sign because that's positive ROI for the company. Plus, I'm sure they have a decent reception when reaching out to podcast hosts since they're addressing real problems the hosts are facing. I think it's fine that they're just doing, founder-led sales and being guests on podcasts and referral programs. I think those are great strategies. And I think those strategies could be in place for a long time within the company. I don't think they'll need to rely on paid ads anytime soon. So good sales strategy, good product-led sales strategy. That seems to be working. That's great to see. So let's keep going.
The roadmap is really great. We're launching next week. Fully automated blog turns into a podcast in the blog author's voice. So we're really excited about that. Generating the actual viral videos that go with those viral moments that we were talking about. Automatic publication to YouTube. So we're automatically publishing to Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, all from one place. And automating guest research, which is a huge pain point.
So I like the step-by-step nature of this slide. And I like how he emphasized that there's one new feature a month. I mean, it shows that they're really moving fast and constantly working to improve the product. I think these are all awesome features that would be very helpful, again, to podcast producers. I mean, this will only enhance the value proposition for the podcast and add to the hours and cost saved calculation that I, put together in my head for the problem slide. And so anytime a business can add features without having to increase the price is a very promising business. I don't think Edward or the PodcastAI team has to spend too much more than just man hours on completing these features. I don't think it costs more to create these things. It's just, general computing power and time. So it's not like, if you're making a better car, you have to add, better seats and better engine or better computers, whatever. And that all costs real money. This doesn't cost real money to PodcastAI. So they're just enhancing the business, enhancing the value proposition, likely keeping the price the same. I think they could probably raise the price, but keeping the price the same to just make customers love the product, tell other people they know, make it a no-brainer to use PodcastAI. So that's always a very promising business when a business can do that. So awesome features. Love how fast they're moving. Love how much value that can provide for podcast hosts. Let's keep going. So
the road to 100 million ARR takes us through 2029, and that sees us having 14,000 podcasts using our system.
This is a good, straightforward bar chart. I like how he breaks it out for the type of customer, professional, small business, business enterprise. You can see that breakdown projection in each of these bars in this bar chart. I mean, it doesn't mean too much because, who the hell knows what the breakdown will be in 5 years, but it hammers down the point that they have 4 real customer segments, each with a willingness to pay. And I also like how there's a number for how many customers they need to get those, revenue numbers, because, 108 million in ARR sounds like a lot, but when you break it down to 14,783 customers, that's not too many. Again, they're hundreds of thousands of podcasts out there. I'm sure there are roughly 15,000 who'd be willing to pay for a tool like this. And so if roughly 15,000 broken up in how they project, which seems to be like 25% in each of these four categories, that makes that $108 million sound a lot more achievable based on how many customers they just need. So I like that breakdown. That helps me as an investor think like, okay, this is actually pretty plausible, rather than you just throwing $100 million in ARR on a bar chart and saying, here's what we intend to do. Because then I'm like, how are you going to do that? But good job using these customer numbers to make that point. Again, the more numbers, the better. So good job of that here. And well, I think they'll get there in 2029. No, it'll probably take a little longer because these are very ambitious goals. But regardless, this slide does a good job of explaining how they intend to get to that revenue, how many customers they need, what do they project the breakdown will be. And all of that kind of helps tell the story that makes this a little more plausible that they get to those numbers. So good slide here. Let's keep going.
And the team consists of myself on product design engineering and Sean Duncombe on operations, sales, and marketing.
So this was the only slide in the deck that I didn't really like or love in some cases. And it's too bad that it was the finishing slide. I think I understand why it's the closing slide. It fits the story he told, and it's the proper flow, but it's just not a great slide because it seems none of these people, I mean, there's only two people, but none of these people have relevant experience with podcasts or building companies before, or else they would have explained that and shown logos. Like we talked about with Malengo last week, they're building a product that, automates fashion designs and sends it to the factory, makes you be able to communicate with the factory better. So it's just a quicker experience going from design idea to finished product. And the two co-founders, one worked at Nike for 20 years and co-created their textile program. The other one scaled a fashion business himself to over $1 million in revenue and had worked at various tech companies before. So that was like a really good founder market fit. Now, they knew the fashion industry really well. They could speak to their customers. They knew the pain points and they knew how to build the solution. That was a perfect team to go after that problem for Malengo. Here, this team seems pretty irrelevant to the problem. I mean, again, they don't have any logo showing their experience. So I don't really know where they've worked before. Doesn't seem like they've worked anywhere too excellent or started companies before, or they would have said that. Doesn't seem like they worked with podcasts before or have run podcasts before, or else they would have said that. So they're just not checking that founder box. I mean, luckily, this product isn't too complicated. Like, it's not hard to understand the problems podcasters go through. It's not that complicated. It's just like, again, editing and creating clips, tweets, whatever. It's not that hard. If this was like a deep tech business, if you're creating rocket engines, you need to have experience creating rocket engines, or else no one's going to invest in your company. So it's not a huge deal for a product like PodcastAI, but it's not checking the box. So that concludes the pitch. That concludes the pitch deck. My only questions for Edward would be, there are many podcast assistant platforms like his out there, and these aren't too hard to build in today's current market. So I'm curious as to, do any offer as many unique features as yours? There wasn't really a competition slide in here. So I'd want to learn more about the competition. Who are the big players now? Why are you different? Why are you better? What makes you unique? Do you have any differentiated features? Are any of those features defensible? What if a competitor comes in with the same features and charges 25% less? Can you still beat them? Why can't they just make the same features and charge 25 less? Is there something in the way of that? Or are you still better than that product by charging the amount you do? Like, how are they defensible? Because this product doesn't seem too defensible. So that's the only thing giving me a little bit of concern here about this product and about this pitch. Everything he said was excellent, but there was a glaring omission of the competition slide, which is always important. So I want to know how he thinks about the competition, because it takes a lot to get to 100 million in ARR, more than just awesome features and solving the problem. You got to be defensible somehow, because there are going to be a lot of people coming after this market as well, because they'll see how big the market is and they'll see how underserved the users are. So need some answers around defensibility. To wrap up, I'm going to go into some things I didn't like about the pitch in the pitch deck and some things I liked about the pitch in the pitch deck before giving an overall rating and decision whether I'd invest or not. So first, what I didn't really like about the pitch and what I thought could have been a little better. I know editing and producing a podcast is a lot of work. I've done it myself, so I know that's a problem, and I would pay for automating these services If I had the budget, I can't say the All Things VC budget can fit something like this yet, but if I had the budget, I would certainly pay for it. But for someone who doesn't record podcasts or edit podcasts, you wouldn't really know how big of a problem this is because they didn't have any metrics in the deck about how much a podcast editor and producer earns an hour or how much extra revenue a podcast website could generate. So as an outsider to this industry, that person probably wouldn't know how big this problem is. So that's why, again, I emphasize how good it is to have numbers on your side about how much this costs a podcast producer to tackle these problems and so on. Because not everyone does a podcast. Not everyone knows how huge these problems are for the podcast community. So put some numbers out there to make anyone understand. Next, as I just kind of went over recently, there's no relevant experience in podcasting or starting companies from the team. Also, there's no logos showcasing, strong work experience at various tech companies or academic experience at great institutions. So, the product speaks for itself in this case, but it's always nice to have a team attacking the problem by seeing an opportunity after working into the industry for so long. People call this founder market fit. The founder is so deep into the market that they have an insight into what's not going well, what could be better. And so they go and build the problem. Doesn't seem to be the case really for the Podcast AI team. And I don't know how exceptional this team is based on their past experience. How good of a builder Edward is, or how good of a seller and marketer and ops person Sean is. It seems fine. Teams don't have to be perfect all the time, but at an early stage, the team slide is really important. So there's nothing they can do about it. You can't make this team slide better, but it's just something to think about. When I was hearing the pitch, I was like, oh, well, team's not great. They're not really checking that box. So that's a little bit of a concern. But things I did like about the pitch and the pitch deck, I like how he started with the market, which not always happens. Sometimes people start with the problem. Usually people start with the problem. Sometimes companies start with the market. But I like how he started with the market because it shows me right off the bat that this is a huge market that is growing exceptionally fast despite its already large size. So that was awesome to see. I thought the product demo was excellent and shows all of their key features that a podcast producer would have done, now being automated by AI. Clearly shows the value add and impact of the product. It also seems like it works really well and it's a smooth process. So that's really good to see. They're currently experiencing exponential growth, clearly, based on their traction slide and how they're already at $100,000 in ARR. That tells me that this problem is a real problem, and the features that Podcast AI has built really solve that problem in an effective way, and they must be loved by their customers. So I thought this was a great slide to come right after the solution slide to show that, hey, our solutions really are working. And we have the numbers to back that up because we're growing this fast and making this much money already. I also like that since they're essentially eliminating a need for an employee, a podcast host now doesn't really need their podcast producer if they're willing to spend a little more time using all the podcast AI tools. Since that's the case, podcast AI can charge a lot of money for their product, which is excellent because, like I said, there are hundreds of thousands of active podcasters in the world that most would pay some decent money for a product like this because it's cheaper than paying someone or paying multiple people, $1,000 a month, $3,000 a month, whatever, to do this work. It's cheaper to do that. So I just thought, that was, again, in the business model slide. I just think they have those sections clearly defined, and I think it's priced at a high price that earns Podcast AI a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things for a customer, that looks like a low price. So that's perfect. That's perfect type of pricing to have. I like how they emphasize they haven't paid for any marketing right now. It's all been product-led growth or founder-led sales. That's excellent at an early stage, showing that the product works. It's, again, product-led growth. That's the best kind of growth. So it's great to see that that's what they're doing currently. And I suspect that can continue based on their podcast to podcast referral strategy. I think that would be really fruitful. I thought it was a good product roadmap for new features that seem like would be really appreciated by podcasters using the product. It makes that value prop even better and potentially gives them the opportunity to raise prices. And based on all these things, I think they have a reasonable path to 100 million in ARR based on how large the market is, how cheap their product is compared to hiring employees and how great their features are. So those were all the things I liked about the pitch. One thing I forgot to say in the little bullet point section about things I didn't like about the pitch was that there's no competition slide. So that hurts this rating a little bit because that's something I have a question about. Again, it's good to answer every question an investor could possibly have. I'm coming away with this with a lot of questions regarding competition and defensibility of the product. So would have been good to see a competition slide, but based on all those things, I'd give this pitch deck a 7 out of 10. Good pitch, could have done some things better. Hope you take away some of those lessons, because I think this is a really good pitch to analyze, because I think there were a lot of really good things, but I think, again, could have been better. Oftentimes, slide decks could always be better. And so I thought this one could have been better. Regardless, would I invest or not? I would invest. I think this is just a huge market that is pretty underserved by technology. I think it's just starting to get adopted by companies wanting to solve problems for podcasters, because there is a lot of tedious work that go into podcasting that don't make the podcast itself better. Me talking and producing good content isn't determined on how well I edit out all my pauses and stutters and so on in the post-production editing. So by being able to automate that and just provide any features you can in this market that's currently pretty underserved, I think that's great. And I think PodcastAI solves that problem with some really great features. And all those features are priced cheaper than hiring an employee would be. So that's great. They have a lot of room to grow with their product. They can just increase the value proposition. They've already had incredible growth from organic marketing and just product-led growth. Traction's incredible. I suspect that to continue. I think there are a lot of customers out there, but there also aren't a lot of customers needed to make this, a $1 billion business. As crazy as that sounds right now, with only $100,000 in ARR, but you can see that path based on how much they're able to charge and how many customers there are out there who, again, don't want to spend time editing podcasts or so on. They could be venture capital firms or marketing companies. The podcast is just marketing for them. They don't want to spend so much time and money on it. So if PodcastAI can make that easier, that's excellent. The only thing I'm concerned about, again, is competition and this team not really having relevant experience. The team I don't think is that important, because, again, this isn't a huge technical problem. They can just talk to their customers a lot and understand it well, but the competition does concern me. That I would need to hear some type of plan around how they plan to be defensible. Who are the large players in the industry today? Why can't they just copy them and release a cheaper edition of it that's just as good that customers would use? So need to understand the defensibility. Regardless, I think this is an excellent product. As a podcaster, I would love something like this. It's clearly already have podcasters who love something like this. And typically when you have a customer base that loves a product so much that it grows this fast and isn't relied on any paid marketing, that's a sign of product market fit. Sign of product market fit is a good sign to invest in a company. So I would invest, but it'd be great to have those questions answered. So that concludes this analysis of this pitch deck from PodcastAI. I hope you got a lot out of it. I'm curious whether you would invest or not. I'm curious what you thought or what you would have rated the pitch deck and the pitch overall. So let me know in the comments what you think about it, because I'm always curious to get other opinions. So hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you got a lot out of it. I will release another one on the next company we're going to do in 2 days. The company will be on Tolt. So again, different lessons, a much different pitch deck. I think that's going to be an interesting episode, as always, I hope. But if you like this episode, please like it. And if you're excited to learn more and see the next episode, subscribe to this content so you can get immediately notified and not forget about it. So thanks again for listening. Hope to see you next time in a few days, and take care.